Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out The Power of London, a history of London's music scenes. Plural.
Panic on the streets of London? It must be some new music. Welcome to Sound Mojo.
Panic?
And today we're looking at how the London music scene has changed.
That hair! There's nothing more hardcore punk than putting a bunch of mousse in your hair.
For this video, we're looking at the city's most influential waves of genres and musical acts. Rather than being known for just one sound, London has evolved throughout the years, acting as a trendsetter for the world, from early rock to punk to Britpop and beyond. So let's take a listen.
Okay.
As the hub for England and formerly the British Empire, London has always been a city that drew people in. The city's cosmopolitan status has brought enough people together to generate
Who's that on stage there? Oh, the Beatles.
An endless stream of great bands. And in many cases, it's pulled in acts from outside of London that turn the city into their base of operations. As a cultural nexus, it's not only served as a place for artists to meet,
Bedford
but also
Theatre.
to grow into...
What's up with that? Formerly the Bedford Music Hall, Camden Town. It opened in 1861. It was a music hall.
Thanks to a wide range of venues and a massive population hungry for great art. This has allowed the London sound to constantly change with the times and keep the city from ever getting stale. British invasion.
It's a big city, I mean.
After the blues fusion of 50s genres like skiffle and beat music, the largest musical wave to sweep London and really the world going into the 60s was rock music. And just as American music influenced British bands, these artists quickly took the US by storm in a movement called the British Invasion. Long-haired London gents dominated radios on both sides of the Atlantic.
That? The guy second from right looks familiar. That's Jeff Beck. Okay, this must be the Yardbirds. This is the Yardbirds. Yardbirds. Okay, got it.
Long-haired London gents dominated radios on both sides of the Atlantic.
Long-haired? Wow. I guess back then their hair was considered long. Now they just look like regular dudes.
Especially the Rolling Stones, the Yardbirds, and the Who.
Some brave volunteers among the British police elect to act with heroism above and beyond the call of duty and escort the Beatles
Crazy.
to their car.
The Beatles
Nuts.
were one of the most revolutionary and influential bands of the era, though they only became London-based as their careers evolved. Other groups like the Zombies, the Kinks, Manfred Mann, and the Dave Clark Five achieved massive success at the time.
Yeah, I just saw another video. I think it was called British Music Before the Beatles, something like that. And most of the acts at the time were either Elvis ripoffs or they sounded like early Beatles. And the Beatles didn't really sound that much different from the other groups that were coming out of Liverpool at the time. But they did use chords that those other groups weren't using. They used like sixth chords, seventh chords, augmented chords. Also, the ladies loved them.
With hits that still resonate today. This period saw a transition from singles into full albums, which helped usher in the broader classic rock era. Classic rock.
Okay. So yeah, the British Invasion. What a crazy time that must have been. In my mind, the British Invasion is the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And I forget that the Who were around, the Kinks, the Dave Clark Five. There were a lot of British bands that were happening at the time. I forgot about it. You don't really think about it. It's usually Beatles and blah, 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 blah.
Classic rock. With invasion bands like the Stones and Beatles creating more sophisticated music across longer records, many London artists quickly followed suit.
But at the time, it wasn't called classic rock, right? They were just calling it rock. Rock and roll.
Sophisticated music across longer records. Many London artists quickly followed suit. Yardbirds guitarist Eric Clapton achieved even bigger success with Cream, which helped cement many psychedelic tones of the time, before he landed his solo career. Similarly, London blues band Fleetwood Mac brought in Americans Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham,
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
changing up their sound and becoming one of the best-selling bands in rock history.
It's nuts that Fleetwood Mac was a blues band, and then the drummer and the bass player got three other new people. Two of them were Americans, and they had this whole second life. Isn't that crazy? Fun fact, the bass player of Fleetwood Mac, John McVie, was also the bass player for the John Mayall Group. How do you pronounce it? And Eric Clapton was in that band too. John Mayall and the Blues Breakers is what it was called. Right, of course. With Eric Clapton, Peter Green, and Mick Taylor. And John McVie. Mick Taylor went on to be in the Rolling Stones. John McVie went on to be in Fleetwood Mac. Eric Clapton, of course, went on to be in Cream, Blind Faith, Derek and the Dominos. I mean, it's Eric Clapton.
Meanwhile, Elton John and David Bowie both moved from piano ballads to costumed glam rock, showing different ways that London music could be theatrical and story-driven. This wave of glam rock would also see T-Rex mix loud riffs with colorful lyrics.
That guy started glam rock.
Not seen in rock before.
Right. This guitar player, I guess he wore a bolo and a bunch of glitter on a TV show, and it blew people's minds. And that started glam rock. What was his name? Was it Mark Bolan? Mark Bolan. Yeah. Oh, also, there was a guy who looked like Alice Cooper. Or Alice Cooper and Kiss stole this one guy's thing. What was his name? Arthur Brown. Arthur Brown. He was doing the Kiss and Alice Cooper thing before Kiss and Alice Cooper. Look at this guy. If I can get a big photo. Look at him. Look at that. Insane Clown Posse also stole his thing. Juggalo.
In speaking of experimental, Pink Floyd constantly challenged the perception of pop through their use of sound effects and unusual production techniques.
Oh my God, did they?
Later in the era, Rod Stewart spun off from bands and crafted a rock sound of his own. Then a disco one, then a pop one.
Yeah, y'all. Rod Stewart's been making recordings since the mid-'60s. Oh, he was in another band called The Faces or something like that, right? In 1963, he joined The Dimensions as a harmonica player and vocalist. In 1964, he joined Long John Baldry and the All-Stars before moving to the Jeff Beck Group in 1967. Joining Faces in 1969. Okay, so those early recordings I heard must have been Long John Baldry and the All-Stars. Maybe it was Jeff Beck Group. Wild. And that voice, you wouldn't think he would be a good singer. If you just hear him talk, you'd be like, dude, your voice, like, clear your throat. Have a cough drop, but it works.
Oh, and of course, each of the Beatles had big solo careers at this time.
Of course.
Paul McCartney put out records solo with his band Wings, and even one album with his wife Linda within just a few years of leaving the Beatles. As a mark of London's ability to draw and empower immigrants, one of the city's most successful acts was led by a singer from Zanzibar.
Zanzibar. Queen. What can you say? One of the best, one of the greatest.
Of course, Queen, who wowed audiences with unbelievable technical proficiency and complex songs like Bohemian Rhapsody that were somehow still catchy.
And they're fun.
Their mix of hard rock and over-the-top energy was perfect for the growing popularity of arena rock at sports venues like Wembley Stadium. Metal. Rock started...
So that was classic rock. Now we're moving on to metal. My knowledge, Black Sabbath started metal, right? Black Sabbath from Birmingham.
Metal. Rock started spinning off in different directions, with aggression and distortion leading to the genre known as heavy metal. Fellow Brits like Deep Purple would go all out on guitars, and Black Sabbath found ways to make rock feel sinister. In London, Iron Maiden cranked up the speed and aggression like a military force, while Motorhead laid on the grit and used a more lo-fi aesthetic.
Hang on. What year are we in? I thought we were in like the early 70s. 70, 71. Iron Maiden's not in that era, right? Maybe late 70s? Maybe not. Let's see. They formed in East London in 1975. Well, all right. 75. Yeah, okay, we're in the mid-70s.
Military force, while Motorhead laid on the grit and used a more lo-fi aesthetic.
Motorhead. Lemmy. Y'all, Lemmy played bass like a guitar. He ran it through guitar amps, Marshall amps, and distorted it, playing a Rickenbacker bass. Crazy. Totally different approach to the bass guitar than anybody else.
London's most important founder of metal came through Led Zeppelin, who helped ease rock fans into the much more intense sound.
Okay, I don't usually think of Led Zeppelin as being a founder of metal, but I guess they are. Don't tell anybody, but they stole a lot of their songs from American blues singers.
Especially with former Yardbirds guitarist Jimmy Page on board. Every member of the band was a wizard at their instrument, meaning vocals wailed, guitars shrieked, and were even played with violin bows. Bass moved bodies, and drums sounded heavier and more chaotic than ever before. Though few bands had a rounded-out cast that compared to Led Zeppelin, this kind of playing was the heart of metal.
She said the drums were crazier. What did she say? More chaotic? I don't know about that. Maybe. But John Bonham changed the sound of rock drumming. The way he played, the parts he played, were very different So, for example, before John Bonham, a typical drum part might be something like boot, chat, boot, boot, cha, boot, boot, cha, boot, boot, cha, boot, boot, right? But after John Bonham, that same drummer would play something more like boo, cha, boo, boo, cha, boo, boo, cha, boo, boo, cha, boo, boo, boo. Something like that. Like there's more syncopation.
Bass moved bodies and drums sounded heavier and more chaotic than ever before.
Definitely
Though
heavier.
few bands had a rounded out cast that compared to Led Zeppelin, this kind of playing was the heart of metal. Prog.
Okay, so we're moving from metal to prog. That's a downgrade, in my opinion. I don't really like prog rock. It's a lot of noodly solos. But, I mean, if you're talking about Pink Floyd, they're not. They're, like, progressive in terms of the sonics of it.
The complexity of acts like Pink Floyd and a growing demand on solos from guitars and keyboards led to an explosion of progressive and art rock projects, too. King Crimson merged solos and film score-like instrumentals into 10-minute epics. Emerson, Lake and Palmer had equally lengthy tracks that challenged how intricate and fast solos could be. Meanwhile, the keyboard-heavy Supertramp used these eccentricities to make out their music that was still pop. Bands like Yes perhaps exemplified both the catchy and detailed aspects of the genre best. Punk and new wave.
There we go.
In the wake of recession and tiredness towards pop in the 70s, more
man.
bare-bones and politically charged music came out of London's angry youth. The district of Camden served as a huge hub for punk, as it would for waves like Britpop in future years. With many bands building momentum, a Ramones gig in a Camden venue known as the Roundhouse seemed to inspire every band around to take their music to the next level.
One gig?
Rebels like The Damned and Generation X raced through tracks with a fury, which would lead to Billy Idol's own marriage of punk and pop.
Where the hell is Camden? Show me on a map. Camden Town. Okay. Oh, that's a relatively small area. Or, I don't know. It looks small. Camden Town is famed for its market, a warren of fashion and curiosities. Is the Roundhouse still there? Dope. It's still there. Look inside, y'all. What? That's crazy. I want to see a show there. It's right by the train tracks, so they can make all kinds of noise. Very cool. So the Ramones played a gig at this place, and it influenced a lot of other bands. That's how punk came to the UK. Wow. Isn't that crazy? One show. Now, someone would just see a 30-second clip of their songs on TikTok or some crap. But back then, they had to go over there physically and play a show. One show changed popular music.
The Clash would merge a political rally cry with distortion and screams, as well as elements of reggae and dub music.
Y'all, London Calling's an excellent album. Great songs, sonically sounds good. Anyway, it's good. It's a great listening trip. Check it out. Yeah.
The seminal act of the era, however, was the Sex Pistols, who not only called out the monarchy in their music, but also had the fashion and bouncing off the walls live shows to make
Johnny
punk
Rotten,
a physical experience. They also exemplified punk's riotous spirit by toying with interviewers and swearing on TV. With the anger fading and a desire to
Look
get
at this
weirder,
guy.
synths and more unusual instruments began to dominate new bands.
Yeah, isn't that strange? Suddenly, everybody cuts their hair and puts on ties. It's like they went 20 years into the past. Fashion's crazy. The word fashion's right by his face. And I said fashion. You know, as angry as the Sex Pistols seem to be, they had some really poppy tunes. They're a lot like Green Day. Angry pop.
Synths and more unusual instruments began to dominate new bands and old punk outfits. New Wave applied punk's against-the-grain mentality to pop and infused its lyrics with the darkness of modern life. Pet Shop Boys and Gary Newman used their keyboards to build mood, while still letting audiences dance. The nature of radio hits and gender norms were challenged during this period, especially by groups like Culture Club and the Eurythmics. Catchy groups like The Police would explore unsavory sides of romance, and Susie and the Banshees made their entire sound shadowy and brooding. Those wanting more mature adult lyrics and a sonic mishmash could dive into Elvis Costello or Ian Dury too.
I've never heard of Ian Dury. Ian Dury and the Blockheads. How did he die? Colorectal cancer. Oh, that's a bad one. Rest in peace, Ian. Okay, moving on. Heavy.
Britpop. The overtly serious tone of much of this music in turn prompted Britpop, which rejected a lot of ongoing alternative music to instead expand on classic pop. Blur and Suede led the charge with music that was cheeky, funny, highly contagious and unabashedly fun. Their music could please the top 40 crowd while having enough depth for the more heady listener.
She said Blur and who?
Blur and Suede led the charge with
Suede. Have I heard of them before? Surely I've heard of them before, but it's not ringing a bell. They were one of the big four with Oasis, Blur, and Pulp. I do remember hearing about Pulp in another video. Let me just listen to Suede here. Oh yeah, that's Britpop, alright. Okay, I recognize that guy's voice. I have heard them before.
Their music could please the top 40 crowd while having enough depth for the more heady listeners. Elastica brought the screeching guitars of punk back into the sound too, while romantic connections with Blur helped fuel drama within the scene.
What about Radiohead?
Speaking of drama, Blur's ongoing feuds with Manchester transplants Oasis helped breed its own kind of fun rivalry in Britpop. Plus, Oasis's Beatles-influenced rock was some of the most memorable rock of the era, so it wasn't just a matter of headlines.
Don't look back and I got... I guess Radiohead wasn't considered Britpop, are they? Radiohead were never a Britpop band, but on the bends they became, and the vent through which its subconscious fumed. Okay, I don't know whose words those are, but okay. Radiohead was never Britpop. Got it.
Vocal pop was seeing an explosion of its own, particularly with groups. London's biggest act in this respect was, of course, the Spice Girls, who would dominate the airwaves with peppy soul, infectious songs, and empowering energy.
No, thank you.
To this day, songs like Wannabe and Say You'll Be There are still earning them tours. East 17 and Robbie Williams would add some male energy to this wave too. And these kinds of acts would be replicated at the turn of the century with the likes of S Club 7.
He's got the 3 Lions logo. No, thank you.
The other side of this need to dance was electronic music and the craze around rave culture, especially in Dalston. With a mix of DJs, electronic producers, hallucinogens, and a lot of experimentation, this subculture sounded totally different from any of the rock-derived music of the time. While the Manchester sound rocked the asphalt in Manchester, the driving beats of house collectives like Mars, and later the likes of Basement Jaxx, kept the party going in London. Basement Jaxx themselves would join the more rhythmically varied UK garage movement, along with the likes of Grant Nelson and MJ Cole.
Oh, that's so creepy.
This sound was particularly centered around the Elephant and Castle district of the city. London's own Dizzy Rascal would later mix in hip-hop and more abrasive tones
I like Dizzy Rascal.
to help kickstart the grime movement in the East End. All the while, DJs like Paul Oakenfold and Evil Eddie Richards helped spread these sounds to the masses, particularly in boroughs like Southwark. Modern London acts like Hot Chips still...
Hang on. This is too much information. Where?
This sound was particularly centered around the Elephant and Castle district of the city.
Elephant and Castle district? That looks like a small area next to the London College of Communications. Interesting looking building. Okay. Elephant and Castle. Okay. Great name, I guess.
Modern London acts like Hot Chips still expand on these sounds today.
Robert Forster. It's good casting.
The beats would slow down somewhere between hip-hop and dance for trip-hop. This sound would blend influences from all over the map until genre seemed irrelevant, though electronics remained a key ingredient in the mix. Listening to the likes of Morcheeba and Goldfrapp gave listeners a smoky, electronic jazz take on the sound. Meanwhile, the club-inspired side would be reflected in the more instrumental and sample-heavy work of DJ Food and Cold Cut. Fatboy Slim would also incorporate many of these sounds as he performed around London. Let's not forget, though less significant to full musical movements, London has been home to a wealth of great singers across the decades. Whether it be the soul of Dusty Springfield, the chipper pop of George Michael, or the romantic tones of both Sade and Seal. Heck, even a percussion group like Stomp managed to find success by moving to London with instruments made out of garbage cans.
I didn't know Stomp was British.
Modern pop.
Okay. Wait, what was this last genre? Okay. So we went from Britpop to electronic and rave culture to trip hop, which I guess means they used some substances. Let's not forget, okay, like singers, pop singers. Yeah, it's London. It's the New York of Britain. Of course they're going to move there, right? Okay, modern pop, Adele, got it.
Recent decades have seen a variety of pop styles coming out of London, with singers like Adele, Amy Winehouse, and Florence and the Machines dominating the charts with powerful voices.
I always forget Florence and the Machine is British. I don't know why.
One Direction even proved the vocal group craze had life left in it. Mumford & Sons fueled folk revivals themselves,
I always forget they're
while
British.
Coldplay had bridged indie, pop, and dance music to be a global hit year after year.
Always forget Mumford & Sons is British because they're playing banjos and mandolins and Americana, you know?
LaRue has also melded many new wave tones into the 90s dance
LaRue.
spirit. As current pop in London proves to be much more of a crossbreed sound,
Gorillaz.
no one has taken this further than Blur's Damon Albarn. Albarn founded Gorillaz, which merged Britpop, punk, trip-hop, rap, and dance into one project.
Oh, that's true.
The band's animated characters have allowed the rotating cast of players around Albarn to represent London through the sounds of the world.
I didn't realize that he incorporated all that stuff into one group. It's true. Way to go, Damon. I had the pleasure, I'm going to name drop here, y'all. I had the pleasure of technically working on a Gorillaz song as an audio engineer because I recorded Andre 3000's vocals on it. I think that's the only name drop I've done on this video so far. When Elton John showed up, I didn't even mention that I know Elton John. See? I'm doing better, y'all. I'm doing better. Gotta stop the name dropping stuff.
Moving forward, today, bands are still flocking to London.
Of course.
Whether it be guitar acts like the Vaccines, or the quirky collaborative spirit of Kiro Kiro Bonito, Superorganism, and the XX.
But who are the Vaccines? I like the name. The Vaccines. They formed in 2010, so they didn't know all about COVID before they had the name. Okay, that's what perked my ears. I thought, wow, what a controversial name. Anyway, moving forward.
The alt-rock scene continues with the likes of Block Party and the visceral performances of Savages.
Dua Lipa. I forgot she's British. She's British.
Plus, London continues to house chart leaders like Dua Lipa, Rita Ora, and Tayo Cruz, producing geniuses like Mark Ronson and the rapping brilliance of Little Sims.
Mark Ronson's British? I thought he was American. He sounds American when he speaks. I know his stepdad, Mick, in Foreigner, the band Foreigner. Mark Ronson, a British American. Well, all right. He was born in London and raised in New York City. His stepfather is Foreigner guitarist Mick Jones. He went to NYU. Rich. I also just dropped another name and I didn't even realize I did it. Mick Jones. There it is.
And the rapping brilliance of Little Sims, Skepta, and Stormzy. London remains an influential powerhouse in the industry, a city whose many sounds continue to shape music history. To hear more about today's best music scenes and cities, subscribe to Sound Mojo and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.
No. Interesting. It makes sense that London would be a huge hub for music because I think it all goes back to resources. I know a lot of times when you have a recording session, you need to rent some gear, and I mean, it could be anything. Guitar amps, drums, preamps, compressors. I mean, there's so much gear, and if you need to rent it, you need to be in a city with rental houses because you can't afford to buy it all. And you need to be in a city with recording studios. Not necessarily anymore because we can make an album on a laptop now. And a lot of times only big cities have that. You know, the rental companies, the recording studios, the venues, the people to come to your shows. Just being in a big city makes it easier. Also, those bigger cities have these smaller cities feeding it. I guess in the UK, there's Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham. I'm not even going to try to mention them all. You guys know better than I do. But all those places are feeding London, so all these people who are musicians, artists, or whoever, they go to the biggest city because of resources, and they want to be next to each other. And Britain's kind of like the Galapagos Islands culturally. It's isolated in its own spot. I mean, it's right next to the rest of Europe, so it's not totally isolated. But there's literally water around the whole island. Not anymore, really, because of the internet. Wah, wah. How many names did I drop in this one? Elton John, Andre 3000, and Mick Jones. I can't help it. When I see someone I know, I gotta say, I know that guy. Anyway, thank y'all for watching this with me, and I'll see you next time. Later.